The moment I pulled into the driveway after my 12-hour shift at the clinic, I knew something was wrong. The front porch light was off. It was never off. My father-in-law, Grandpa Walter, had kept that light burning every single night for the past 4 years, ever since his vision began to fail. He said it helped him feel less alone in the dark. But that night, the house sat in complete blackness, like a hollow eye staring at nothing. I found the note on the kitchen counter, held down by a can of soup, the cheap store-brand kind I never bought because Walter had trouble with the pull tab. My husband Derek's handwriting was large and careless, the way it always was when he couldn't be bothered to slow down. Sheila had added a line at the bottom in her tight, pinched script. Together, the note read, "Flew to Scottsdale for a few days. Conference for Sheila, vacation for me. The old man's been fed. Don't make it a big deal, Clara. You're always home anyway." I stood in that kitchen for a long moment. I didn't cry. I was too tired for that. I set my nursing bag down on the counter and walked to the back of the house, to the small room off the hallway that had once been a study but now belonged to Walter. The door was closed. I knocked softly before opening it. The room smelled stale. The window was shut tight, which Walter hated. He always asked me to crack it open an inch so he could hear the birds in the morning. His dinner tray was on the floor beside the bed, the food untouched, the mashed potatoes crusted dry. He was lying flat on his back with his hands folded over his chest, very still, his eyes closed. My heart lurched. I rushed to the bedside and pressed 2 fingers to his wrist. A pulse, steady but weak. "Walter," I said softly. "Walter, it's Clara." He didn't move for a moment. Then he exhaled, slow and long, and his fingers curled slightly around mine. I exhaled with him. "How long have you been lying here like this?" I whispered. His lips moved, barely audible. "Since morning." I helped him sit up, brought water, coaxed him through small, careful sips the way I did with patients who had been without fluids too long. I warmed soup on the stove, the real kind, from scratch, the way he liked it, and sat beside his bed while he ate. His hands shook around the spoon. I didn't help him. He hated being helped more than he needed to be. When the bowl was empty and some color had returned to his face, he set the spoon down with deliberate care. Then he did something that stopped me completely. He looked directly at me. Not the unfocused, milky gaze I had grown used to over 2 years of his worsening blindness. Not the way his eyes drifted slightly past a person's face the way they always did now. He looked at me. Fully. Precisely. The way a man looks at someone he trusts with something enormous. "Close the door," he said. His voice was quiet, but it was not the voice of a frail old man. It was calm and deliberate and absolutely clear. I closed the door. "Sit down, Clara." I sat. Walter reached beneath his mattress, not fumbling, not searching, but reaching with the practiced certainty of someone who has done this 1,000 times, and he pulled out a small leather notebook, creased and dark with age. He set it on his knee. Then he looked at me again, and I realized with a slow, cold clarity that the man sitting before me had not been blind for a very long time. "I need you to listen carefully," he said, "and I need you to believe me when I tell you that everything I'm about to say is the truth." Walter told me his full name was not simply Walter Briggs, the retired schoolteacher his son Derek had always described him as. His full name was Walter Raymond Briggs, and for 31 years before his supposed retirement, he had built and operated one of the largest private logistics and warehousing networks in the Southeast. The company had been quietly transferred, piece by piece, to a charitable foundation 12 years ago, before Derek or Sheila ever thought to look closely at his finances. The family home, the land behind it, the rental properties in 3 counties, none of it was in his name anymore. It was held in the foundation. There was nothing for Derek to inherit. There had not been for over a decade. I sat very still. "Why are you telling me this now?" Walter's jaw tightened. "Because last Thursday, while you were at work, Derek came in here and told me I had 6 months to sign over power of attorney to him and Sheila, or he would have me declared incompetent and placed in a facility by the end of the year." He paused. He thought I couldn't see his face when he said it. He thought I didn't notice that he had already printed the forms. I felt something drop away inside me. The version of my life I had been trying to hold together, the belief that Derek was difficult but not cruel, that Sheila was cold but not dangerous, that version quietly collapsed. "How long?" I asked. "How long have you been pretending?" "The vision loss is real," he said. It was real, and it was severe. 2 years ago I lost most of my central vision, macular degeneration. But over the last 8 months, with the right treatment, a great deal of it has come back. He turned the leather notebook over in his hands. "I told no one. I needed to know who these people really were when they believed no one was watching. He had been watching. Every conversation Derek had with Sheila in the hallway, every phone call taken in low voices near his door, every time his dinner was slid in late and cold. Every time Sheila told Derek it was time to start looking at memory care facilities not for Walter's benefit, but so the house would be empty and available to sell. "I have recordings," Walter said simply. Behind his closet, behind a panel that looked like ordinary drywall, was a small, cool, immaculate space no larger than a walk-in closet. Inside was a laptop, 2 external drives, a wireless router, and 5 small cameras that fed into the system from different corners of the house. Walter had had it installed 4 years ago, before the vision loss, by a security consultant he trusted. He had never told anyone it existed. He played me 30 seconds of audio from 3 days earlier. Sheila's voice, sharp and satisfied, telling Derek that the old man was practically begging to be put away, that they just needed to be patient a little longer, let him get a little worse, and then no judge would question the incompetency filing. Derek laughed. He said he wished it would move faster. He said the house alone was worth enough to clear both their debts and then some. I pressed my hand over my mouth. I sat with that audio for a long time. Then Walter asked me the same question Grandma Hattie had asked Amani in a different house in a different story. He asked it differently, in his quiet, measured way, but the weight of it was identical. "Are you willing to help me?" he said. "Not for me, Clara, for yourself. Because you have been carrying this family for 4 years, and neither of them has ever once looked at what that cost you." I thought about the 12-hour shifts, the overtime I volunteered for because Derek hadn't been able to hold a position for more than 8 months at a time. The credit card debt I had paid down quietly, twice, without telling him, because I was ashamed of what our life looked like from the outside. The birthday I spent in the hospital parking lot eating a granola bar because I hadn't wanted to go home to an empty house, and a note that said he and Sheila had gone to dinner. I looked at Walter. "Tell me what you need me to do." That night, Walter called a man named Preston Holt. Preston arrived within the hour in a dark gray sedan, unhurried, carrying a slim briefcase. He was Walter's attorney and had been for 22 years. He walked into the house without knocking, which told me he had been here before under different circumstances, and he nodded at me with the respectful acknowledgement of someone who already knew my name. The 3 of us sat at the kitchen table. Documents came out of the briefcase. Preston explained the full scope of the Foundation's holdings with the efficient clarity of someone who had explained it many times and still understood its weight. The house, the land, the 3 investment properties, the operating endowment of the Foundation itself. None of it was accessible to Derek or Sheila through any legal mechanism, because Walter had ensured that 12 years ago precisely so that it wouldn't be. The incompetency petition Derek was planning to file would fail. It would fail because Walter was not incompetent, and when it failed, it would expose Derek and Sheila's intentions plainly in a public legal record. But Walter didn't want to just let them fail. He wanted them to understand, completely, and without any possibility of misreading it, exactly what they had done and who they had done it to. I sent Derek a text that night at 11:15. I kept it short, the way he preferred. I told him Walter had taken a bad turn, that I was worried, that I thought he should come home soon. I added, at the end, that I didn't want to call 911 because I knew how much he hated involving outsiders in family matters. I knew he would read that as an opportunity. He replied in 4 minutes. He said he'd be back by Thursday, 2 days away. That gave us 2 days. Preston made calls I didn't entirely follow, but the results of them arrived the next morning in the form of 2 men in work shirts who spent 6 hours transforming the ground floor of the house. Not renovating, restoring. Walter's real furniture, which had been in storage since Sheila had convinced Derek it looked too old and replaced it with cheap, flat-pack pieces, came back. Heavy oak and dark leather. A proper dining table. The bookcases that had been removed from Walter's study returned, filled with the books that had sat in labeled boxes in the garage for 3 years. The cheap laminate furniture Sheila had chosen went out to a donation truck. By Wednesday evening, the house looked like what it actually was, the home of a man of considerable substance and taste, not the cluttered holding space of a family waiting for an old man to disappear. Walter underwent a transformation of his own that I found quietly astonishing. The man who had shuffled through the hallway in worn slippers and a faded cardigan for 2 years now sat at his restored desk in a shirt I had never seen, charcoal gray and crisply pressed, with his reading glasses in his breast pocket instead of lost somewhere in the bedding. His posture was different. His voice when he spoke to Preston was different. The performance of fragility had been so complete, so sustained, that seeing it fully dropped was like watching a different person step out of a shell. I changed too, not theatrically. I put on the navy dress I had bought for a colleague's retirement dinner and never worn again. I did my hair. I sat with Walter in the restored living room on Wednesday night, and we talked for 2 hours. Really talked, the way we never had about the foundation, about what it did, about the families it had helped relocate and stabilize over the years, about what he hoped it would keep doing. At the end of the conversation, he said, "I want to name you Director of Operations." I said no. The word came out reflexively, the way it always had when something good was offered to me. He waited. He was very good at waiting. I said, "I'm a nurse, Walter. I don't know anything about running a foundation." He said, "You've been running this household, managing my care, holding down a full-time job, and covering your husband's financial failures for 4 years without being asked and without recognition. You know how to manage. You know how to care. The administrative part can be learned." He folded his hands on the desk. "The other part cannot." I looked at the documents Preston had left. I picked up the pen. My hand was steady. Thursday arrived gray and cool. We kept the house dim, just the kitchen light on. Walter sat in his chair in the living room in the dark, still as a portrait. Preston stood in the hallway. The 2 men who had come with Preston on Monday were back, stationed quietly near the side entrance. I sat on the small couch near the fireplace with my hands in my lap, listening. At 6:47 in the evening, headlights swept across the front window. Derek's voice came first, outside, loud the way it always was when he'd been drinking on a plane. He was telling Sheila something about a golf course they'd visited, laughing at something that had apparently happened at dinner the night before. Sheila's voice cut through his, sharper, already impatient to be inside. She said she was exhausted and needed a real shower, not a hotel shower. Neither of them mentioned Walter. The front door opened. Derek hit the entryway light first, the same switch that flooded the front hall. Then he reached for the living room lamp, the floor lamp by the door that Sheila had chosen because it was cheap and pointed the light uselessly at the ceiling. The lamp was gone. In its place was Walter's old standing lamp with the amber glass shade, the one that cast warm, direct light across the room. When it came on, it lit everything. Derek saw me first. He processed me with the quick dismissal he always used, wife, furniture, background, and then his eyes moved to the room itself, the restored furniture, the books, the absence of the cheap things Sheila had installed. His face shifted. Then, his eyes found the armchair by the window. Walter sat with his hands resting on the arms of the chair, his spine straight, looking directly at his son with full, clear, unhurried attention. Sheila walked in behind Derek and stopped so abruptly that her suitcase rolled into the back of her ankle. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. Derek laughed first, the nervous kind, the kind that was trying to decide whether the situation was a problem. "Dad, you're sitting up." "I am," Walter said. "You look good." Derek said it the way people say a word when they're not sure what word to use. His eyes were scanning the room, still cataloging the changes, trying to build a story around them that made sense to him. "What happened to the furniture?" "It came back," Walter said. Sheila found her voice. It was the voice she used when she wanted to sound gentle and concerned, the performance she had been giving for 3 years whenever Walter was within earshot. Walter. We were so worried when we got Clara's text. How are you feeling? What happened? Can you see me right now? You're looking right at me. I can see you very well, Sheila, Walter said. I have been able to see quite clearly for the better part of 8 months. The silence that followed that sentence was different from the silence before it. It had weight. Derek turned to me. His voice had dropped, and something mean had come into it, the tone he used when he'd already decided this was my fault. What is this? What did you tell him? What have you been doing while we were gone? I looked at my husband. 4 years of looking at him, and I felt, standing there in that restored room beside his father, almost nothing. Not the old anxiety, not the old hope, not the old habit of softening my voice to avoid his temper. Just clarity. I didn't tell him anything, I said. He told me. Preston stepped in from the hallway. Derek spun. Who the hell are you? Preston Holt, he said pleasantly. I've been Walter's attorney for 22 years. We met briefly at Christmas in 2019. You were more interested in the bar cart. He opened his briefcase with no particular hurry. I have some documents that will require your attention this evening. Derek's face was cycling through expressions too fast to read. He pointed at Preston, then at his father, then at me. This is Dad, whatever she told you, whatever she's been filling your head with while we weren't here. Derek. Walter's voice was not loud. It didn't need to be. Sit down. It was the voice of a man who had run a company for 31 years. Hundreds of people had sat down when that voice said to, Derek sat. Sheila remained standing near the door. Her carry-on bag was still in her hand. She had not let go of it. Walter nodded to Preston, who turned the laptop on the coffee table to face Derek. The footage was cued and ready. 18 minutes of it, drawn from 4 different cameras across 3 months. Derek and Sheila in the kitchen, speaking in low voices about the incompetency petition, about the estimated value of the house, about how much longer they thought they had to wait. Sheila's voice describing the facility she'd already contacted decent enough for what it is, and her certainty that no one would challenge the filing once Walter was officially labeled unable to manage his own affairs. Derek watching the screen, his face going very still. The footage of the dinner tray left on the floor, the window sealed shut. The day the visiting care aide had been turned away at the door by Sheila, who told her through the screen that Walter was sleeping and they'd reschedule, and the aide's records showing that this had happened not once, but 4 times. I had not known about the aide. When that footage played, I felt the heat of tears behind my eyes for the first time that night. That's not, Derek started. That's out of context. There is no context that changes what that is, Walter said. Sheila set her bag down. Her voice, when she finally used it, was the most honest it had ever sounded. The performance had dropped entirely, and what was underneath was simply scared. Walter, we were trying to help. We thought you'd be better cared for with professionals. We thought. You thought I was going to die soon and that the house would be yours. Walter's voice did not rise. You have been thinking that for 3 years, and you have been treating me accordingly. He looked at his son. I want you to understand something, Derek. I want it to be very clear. I am not angry at you because you are greedy. Greed is a small thing. I am finished with you because you looked at a man who loved you and decided he was worth more dead than alive. Derek flinched. Whatever he had been preparing to say, it left him. Preston laid the documents on the table. The full accounting of the foundation, the legal structure of the asset transfers. The letter from Walter's ophthalmologist confirming the partial recovery of his vision over the prior 8 months, dated and signed. The incompetency petition Derek had filed, or rather, attempted to file, 3 days earlier, before flying to Scottsdale, and the response it had received from the court, which was a request for a competency evaluation that Walter had already completed and passed at a level Preston described as unambiguously clear. There was also a restraining order. Temporary, but legally binding, effective immediately, requiring Derek and Sheila to vacate the property within 2 hours and restricting their access while the full legal proceedings were underway. Derek stood up. You can't do this. This is my family home. I grew up in this house." "You grew up in a house your father built," Preston said. "The deed has been held by the Walter R. Briggs Charitable Foundation since 2013. You have never had an ownership interest in this property. That's fraud. That's elder fraud." He didn't understand what he was signing. Preston adjusted his glasses. The transfers were made when Walter was 58 years old, in full health, advised by independent legal counsel, and reviewed by 3 separate financial attorneys. "I would encourage you not to repeat that accusation publicly." Sheila grabbed Derek's arm. Her voice was very quiet now, a whisper meant only for him. But the acoustics of a restored room with proper furniture are different from an empty box of flat-pack pieces, and I heard her clearly. She said, "Stop, just stop. We need to go." Derek shook her off. He turned to me, and I saw the thing in him that I had always known was there but had chosen, for 4 years, to explain away. The entitlement. The profound, unshakable conviction that the people around him existed to absorb whatever he needed to put down. "You did this," he said. "You came into this family and you turned him against us. You're a nurse, you probably manipulated him. You probably—" "Derek." I kept my voice very even. "I filed for divorce. The paperwork was submitted this afternoon. Preston was kind enough to have it served to you by courier this evening." I watched his face. "Your copy is in the outside pocket of your carry-on bag. Sheila put it through the mail slot at the hotel this morning because the courier left it at the front desk." Sheila's head snapped toward her bag. Derek looked at his sister. The look between them, in that moment, was the most honest communication I had ever seen them share. Mutual comprehension of what they had done and where it had landed them. They left within the hour. Sheila efficient and silent, filling a single bag with what she'd brought, not looking at any of us. Derek loud at first, then quiet in a way that was worse than the loudness, the quiet of a man who understood, finally, that there was nothing left to negotiate. I stood in the doorway and watched the rental car pull out of the driveway. The following months were not simple. They were not a montage of success and warm light. There were court hearings that required me to take unpaid days off work. There were phone calls from Derek's lawyer that came at inconvenient hours and tried, in careful legal language, to suggest that my relationship with Walter was improper or financially motivated. Preston handled those. There was a period in the 4th month when Derek tried to file a counterclaim alleging undue influence, and I had to submit to a deposition that lasted 4 hours. I sat in that conference room in my work clothes, tired in a way that went all the way down to my skeleton, and I answered every question with the same simple accuracy. The claim was dismissed. I kept working at the clinic. Walter's health genuinely improved, not because of any dramatic reversal, but because the low-grade, chronic neglect had ended and his actual medications were being administered correctly, and his window was opened an inch every morning, and his dinner was hot when it reached him. He gained 6 pounds in 2 months. He started sleeping through the night. We developed a routine that I hadn't expected to love as much as I did. Coffee at 7, before my shift, at the kitchen table, by the east window, he read. I looked at my phone and pretended not to be watching him read, because there was something about the particular way a very intelligent older man reads the attention, the occasional small nod that I found unexpectedly comforting. In the 6th month, at that kitchen table, Walter set down his cup and said, "I'd like to revisit the conversation about the foundation." I had thought about it every day since he first raised it. I had told myself I was unqualified, too young, not educated in that world. I had told myself all the things I had been told for years about what I was not prepared to do. I had also, quietly, read every publicly available report the Foundation had ever filed. I had read about the family stabilization programs and the elder care initiatives and the scholarship network that had sent 43 students to college in the past decade. I had read until I understood the shape of the work, the logic of it, the places it was succeeding, and the places it was stretched thin. I have some ideas, I said, about the elder care programs. Walter smiled. The full smile, the one I had not seen often, the one that rearranged his whole face. Tell me, I told him. I talked for 20 minutes without stopping, which I had never done in front of anyone, and Walter listened without interrupting once. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "That's exactly right. Every single point." I became director of operations 3 weeks later, officially, with Preston as the legal witness. I kept my nursing license current. I kept my shifts at the clinic, fewer of them, but I kept them. Walter said he understood why I wouldn't give them up entirely, and I think he actually did. Derek and Sheila's legal proceedings concluded in month 8. The criminal charges financial elder abuse, filing a fraudulent legal petition, 4 documented violations of the duty of care resulted in convictions for both of them. Sheila received a suspended sentence and a substantial fine that effectively drained the savings she had spent years accumulating. Derek received a sentence that included community service, probation, and a civil judgment that required him to pay restitution into the foundation. I was not in the courtroom when the sentences were read. I was at a presentation I had been invited to give at a regional elder care conference. I found out from Preston via text while I was waiting backstage. I read it twice. Then I put my phone away and walked out to the podium. I was not happy about what had happened to Derek in the simple way I had imagined I would be, back in the dark days of my marriage when justice felt like something that would fix me. I was relieved. I was sad, the complicated sad of a person grieving something they had hoped would be different. I was also, underneath all of it, finally free in the specific, structural way that comes when the person who has been diminishing you is no longer in a position to reach you. One evening in early autumn, Walter and I sat on the back porch after dinner, the way we had started to do when the weather allowed. The yard was full of the kind of light that only exists for about 20 minutes at the end of a clear day, amber and specific, making everything look like it belongs in a memory. Walter had his tea. I had mine. He reached over and set his hand over mine. His hands had always been large, the hands of someone who had worked physically before he worked administratively, and his grip was still strong in the way that matters. "I owe you an apology," he said. I looked at him. "I should have told you sooner. What was happening? What I was doing. I kept telling myself I was protecting the plan, but the truth is, I was also protecting myself from the possibility that you might leave before it was finished." He looked out at the yard. "That was selfish. You deserve to know sooner." I thought about it seriously, the way he had taught me to think about things, whether I would have done anything differently with the knowledge, whether it would have helped me or complicated me in those months before it came apart. "I don't think I would have known what to do with it earlier," I finally said. "I think I needed to see it myself first." He nodded slowly. "You probably did." We sat there until the amber light faded and the yard went blue and still. I thought about the 4 years of that house before that night and the years of it after, and how the same rooms could hold such entirely different lives depending on who was inside them and what they had decided to do with what they'd been given. I thought about what Walter had said at the beginning, when he first looked at me across his dinner tray in the dim room that smelled of stale air and sealed windows. "You have been carrying this family for 4 years, and neither of them has ever once looked at what that cost you." Someone had finally looked, and from that one moment of being truly seen, everything else had followed. The birds came back to the yard that autumn. Walter heard them first, before I did, and pointed without saying anything, and I leaned forward to look. And there they were, ordinary birds, unremarkable birds, the kind that are everywhere once you start paying attention, and I realized I had not heard them once in 4 years of living in that house, because I had never once had the quiet necessary to listen. I was listening now,